How does a home appraisal work? If you're asking that question, you're probably in the market to buy a home and someone probably told you that an appraisal is part of the process. You had a question, so we're gonna do our best to answer it for you. Hi, my name is Gavin Sessions with Loans Made Simple. If you're interested to learn about all things related to home loans and mortgage, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel. We post new content each week. If you're ready to get qualified for a home loan or get connected to a great real estate agent, scroll down, find our contact information, reach out to us, or you can leave us a comment. We'll be down there getting answers to those questions and comments ASAP. Well, as I mentioned, we're here today because you asked the question, how does a home appraisal work? So we're gonna do our best to answer that for you. So in this video, we're gonna cover several things. We're gonna start with a brief definition of what an appraisal is and that it is different than a home inspection report. We'll cover the key aspects of a home appraisal. Next, we're gonna discuss the steps that an appraiser must go through to complete a home appraisal. Then we'll move on to discuss and break down all the important sections of the home appraisal report. And then last but not least, we'll answer some common questions that consumers have about home appraisals. So let's start by discussing briefly the differences between a home appraisal and a home inspection. So the purpose of a home appraisal is to determine the home's fair market value and ensure that the buyer is not paying more for the home than what the home is worth. Whereas a home inspection is a comprehensive report that is given to a buyer so they can understand all the nitty-gritty details of the home's condition, right? Think of a mechanic lifting up the hood of a car and giving a very thorough inspection to that vehicle. That's exactly what a home inspector is going to do for you when you make an offer on a house and hire them to give you a report on the home's condition. It's worth noting that a home inspection is actually not mandatory or required, although it is highly recommended. It's also important to know that when you hire an inspector to do a report for you and to do an inspection for you on a house, they're actually going to ask for payment when that report is handed over to you. So typically within a day or two, whereas a home appraisal is considered a closing cost and is typically paid for at closing and will show up on your closing disclosure. All right, let's next jump in and talk about the key aspects of a home appraisal. It's worth noting that home appraisals are typically 30 to 40 pages in length, and they are very comprehensive in the detail that they provide. So we're not going to get that nitty-gritty here on this video, but we certainly are going to hit the highlights. So the first thing we want to mention about an appraisal is the appraised value. So the appraised value will determine the maximum amount of money that the lender is willing to loan on the home based on the home's value. And the appraised value can play a crucial role in negotiation between buyer and seller. The appraised value is based on several different factors such as location, size of the home, age of the home, and comparable sales of similar homes in the immediate vicinity. So lenders require appraisals to justify the loan amount and ensure that the home buyer is not paying more for the home than what the home is worth. Should also note that appraisers do not work for the mortgage company or the lender, and it's their job to be a neutral third party and provide an impartial and unbiased opinion of the property's condition and value. Appraisers also are licensed and they are held to strict guidelines and standards when determining the property's value. So appraisals are typically valid for as long as 60 to 90 days to account for any market conditions that could happen. So in the event the loan is not closed in that 60 to 90 day period, it is possible that a new appraisal would have to be ordered. Now let's walk through the steps that an appraiser must take to complete a home appraisal. The first is going to be an on-site inspection. So the appraiser will go on-site, and often that's the only boots on the ground that the lender will have to actually ensure that the home is there, right? So they're going to evaluate the physical characteristics of the property, make notes of any deficiencies, and confirm that the home has all the features that the purchase sale agreement claims that it has. The lender will take the appraiser's word for it that the home actually exists and will trust that the home is in a condition to be sold. The next is the comparable market analysis, often called the CMA. So now that the appraiser's been on site to have a look at the property, now they're going to go back and look at homes that are similar in size, age, and location that have sold recently. Typically, they're going to need 3 to 5 comps, and typically these homes ideally are within 1 mile of the subject property, and they have sold within the last 6-month time period. Next is data analysis and adjustments. So the appraiser will then basically line list these properties side by side to the subject property and make comparisons based on square footage, based on acreage, based on location, based on bedroom count, bathroom count, quality of construction, and many other different variables. And they're going to make adjustments to the subject property based upon the prices that the comparable properties recently sold for and the features that those comparable properties have. So one example, maybe the subject property has a 2-car garage, but one of the comparable properties has a 3-car garage. They would make an adjustment to account for that difference. Last is the final valuation, where the appraiser presents their opinion of the subject property's market value based on the research that they've completed. Just want to pause the video for a quick moment and invite you to connect with us. If you're ready to take the next step to get qualified and speak to a mortgage professional, a loan officer, or if you'd like to get connected to a great real estate agent, click the links below. All right, moving right along, let's break down the key sections of a home appraisal report. The first is the subject property information, and that's where you're going to see things like bedroom count, bathroom count, condition of construction, number of garage spaces, how big's the piece of property, et cetera, et cetera. Next will be the neighborhood description, which will provide us an overview of what the neighborhood looks like where the subject property is located. That will include things like schools and parks, other amenities and features the neighborhood might have, as well as the age of the neighborhood. We touched on this briefly, but next is the comparable sales section of the report. That's where the appraiser is going to select 3 to 5 properties and give very detailed information on each of them, right? So the size of the lot, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the number of garage spaces, so on and so forth. The next section is the property description and some analysis. So the appraiser will provide an analysis of the subject property's physical characteristics and note anything that might adversely or positively affect the home's value. Continuing on, we're going to talk about the appraisal's valuation conclusion. And this is where, after all the research and adjustments with the comparable properties, they're going to determine what they believe the fair market value is for this property. Last is the appraiser's certification, where they will confirm that they completed this appraisal to the best of their ability, following all the guidelines that they are held to. All right, so now that we've thoroughly discussed the details of an appraisal report, let's get to some of the most frequently asked questions that we see. One of the first questions we see is, can I challenge the appraisal if I disagree with the value? So this question is usually from the listing side or from the seller. In other words, the value wasn't where they thought it would be, and so they disagree. And yes, they have the ability to present additional comparable properties that the appraiser may not have taken into account, and that could have a positive impact on the home's value. It's also worth noting that each lender is going to have a different process for rebutting that appraised value. So what happens if the appraised value comes in lower than the agreed upon purchase price? Well, if you're a buyer, this might be good news for you, as it would potentially give you the opportunity to go back to the seller and renegotiate a lower purchase price. And that's very simply because depending on the loan to value, the lender will likely not allow the buyer to pay more for the home than what the appraiser believes the home is worth. So in an example of a $500,000 purchase price and a $480,000 appraised value, the buyer would hope that the seller would reduce the purchase price to $480,000. Now, if the buyer had a large down payment, it is possible that the low appraisal wouldn't affect the transaction because the loan to value would simply differ, right? Let's do another scenario here. So let's say you were under contract to buy a home, this time for $520,000, but this time the appraisal came in at $500,000. And let's say you were planning to do a $120,000 down payment, right? So $520,000 purchase price, $400,000 loan amount. The appraised value came in right at $500,000. So without much of an impact to buyer or seller, the buyer could agree to move forward with the lower appraisal, buy the house at $520,000, keep their loan amount at $400,000, and they'd still have an 80% loan to value, right? So $400,000 loan amount divided by an appraised value of $500,000 is 80%. In that circumstance, there would not be much of a negative impact on the buyer should they choose to move forward and buy that house in a situation where it appraised less than the negotiated sales price. All right, the next question we see is, can I choose my own appraiser? And the answer is no. So appraisers must be impartial and arm's length and third party and not affiliated at all with the transaction. So when you go under contract to purchase a house and when you get a loan, the lender will have an approved panel or an approved AMC that they will work with. And that frankly, the lender can't even specifically choose the appraiser that is signed to the transaction, but the order would go out to a panel or to a company, and the appraiser would be assigned to that order impartially. All right, another frequently asked question is, how long does an appraisal take? So the fastest appraisals are probably a few days, and they can last up to a few weeks, and it just really depends on the urgency, right? So let's say you're trying to close a loan transaction super fast, an appraisal can be ordered on a rush, and that can be turned around typically in a few days. That would come with a premium of probably a couple $100s, and it also depends on the complexity of the property, right? So if it's a single family home that's, 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom on a quarter-acre lot, probably not super complex and probably fairly easy to appraise. But let's say it was a 25-acre property with a horse arena and 5,000 square feet, and as well as a shop, right? I mean, all those different characteristics are going to make it more difficult for the appraiser to determine the value, and also more challenging for them to find comparable similar properties. All right, next, will the appraisal be shared with me? Well, if you're the buyer, absolutely the appraisal will be shared with you. And actually, you'll sign a disclosure to confirm that you received the appraisal. So this video hopefully helps you highlight the things that you need to look for when you are reviewing that appraisal. And like I said, you can look at it with as much detail as you choose. It's probably 30 to 40 pages in length. The key things to note are the things we've already mentioned here. Obviously, the value of the home, the condition of the home, as well as some of the comparable properties and adjustments that were made. All right, another question is, what happens if the appraisal comes in low or comes in with an insufficient value? And what happens if the transaction is terminated? Can I get a refund on the appraisal in that case? And the answer is usually not. So the lender has paid for the appraiser to complete the work. That appraiser will need to be paid, and typically that payment will come from the potential buyer, or if this is a refinance transaction, would come from the owner of the home. Along those lines, you will want to communicate with your lender to make sure you understand the policies for a transaction that terminates when an appraisal has already been completed. One last question here. Can the seller provide an appraisal that's already been completed and have that be used for the buyer's transaction? The answer is no. Almost always a lender is going to order a brand new appraisal from the third-party panel or AMC that they choose to work with, and they will get an impartial and third-party opinion of that home's value. It's never a bad idea for a seller to order an appraisal before they list a property to ensure that their list price is accurate, but it won't be able to be used in the buyer's loan transaction. All right, lots of information there on home appraisals, and ideally this empowers you to know what to look for when you are in a transaction where an appraisal is required. If you're someone who's looking to buy a new home or get connected to a great real estate agent, as we said, scroll down, find our contact information, or please leave us a comment. We'll get back to those comments and questions as soon as possible. We hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.